One of the great sources for video ideas comes from Matt Bishop, the former F1 Racing Magazine editor and racing anorak, who often puts stuff up on his Twitter that's like an on this day or a stat attack or just something interesting that often gives me food for thought for these kinds of videos. For instance, earlier this week, Matt posted something about Jacques Villeneuve, the 1997 Formula 1 champion and the 1995 kart and Indy 500 winner, and whether JV, John Newhouse, however you know him, should be inducted into the Motorsport Magazine Hall of Fame, and had an article detailing the reasons why. Well, I mean, the guy won the kart title, Indy 500 and F1 championship in a 3-year span. Not many other people have done that other than Jim Clark and Graham Hill. JV is in a very exclusive club there. But there is an actual Hall of Fame for motorsport. The FIA has one set up, an actual FIA Hall of Fame. It was set up in 2017 and the inaugural members were the then 33 world champions, from Farinia in 1950 all the way up to Hamilton. In 2018 they added a few more, and then in 2019 a few more after that. It appears that they haven't added anybody since. I think everybody that's going to be in is now in. But one thing I have been asked quite a few times now over the course of the last couple of years is, there is an FIA Hall of Fame, we know who's in it, but is there kind of like a special VIP lounge at this Hall of Fame where the racing immortals go? Not a Mount Rushmore type of thing, because picking 4 drivers is going to be quite literally impossible, but a sort of room where only a select few are allowed in, and it will be a very, 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 very long time, if there will be another time, that anybody else will be allowed into this very exclusive club. And to be honest, detailing a greatest of all time in racing is pretty difficult. There's so many different eras, disciplines and other factors going on. For instance, Jim Clark drove at a time when the chances of being killed were very high. When Schumacher was at his peak, there hadn't been a death in Formula 1 for nearly 10 years. Jimmy drove cars that were essentially bathtubs on wheels with all the grip being mechanical. Schumacher had a car that had downforce, front and rear wings, diffusers, traction control, power steering, engine control units, telemetry, and everything else he could possibly need. And it would also be very wrong to look at people that have only raced in Formula 1. Formula 1 isn't the be-all and end-all of racing. You only have to look at the likes of Mario Andretti, for instance. Although the whole thing is made a lot harder due to modern drivers not taking on multiple disciplines at the same time like they used to. Andretti, Clark, Hill, Stewart and so on would be racing something new nearly every week. Clark won the F1 Championship, Indy 500 and the British Touring Car Championship. So what we're going to have with this list is the obvious candidates, the ones that everybody is going to name. Whether you watch Rally, whether you watch Formula 1, whether you watch NASCAR, whether you watch IndyCar, whether you watch touring cars, whether you watch sports cars, everybody's going to say the same names. Where it gets harder is naming the other ones who get to go in. Finding others that aren't just limited to Formula 1 will also be pretty difficult, at least you'd probably think so, because we just seem to think of Formula 1 drivers being the peak. But it's going to be hard anyway, because with these things it's going to be based off opinions. In this case, my opinions, mostly going off what I've read over the years of doing these motorsport history videos, and that in turn is going to get people hovering over their keyboards ready to lambast my choices. Or because I've left out the person they were thinking of, and that's also going to upset people. The other problem is that while I want this to be a very exclusive club, the guest list might get longer than I otherwise anticipated. Screw it, it's Christmas, it's just a bit of fun, this isn't to be taken super seriously. So before I get into the drivers that I've sort of looked into and picked who get to join this exclusive club, I thought I'd go through the obvious people first, because if I stop to name every single driver and give the reasons, we'd be here all day, and at some point I've got to get up out of this chair because, well, it's nearly 12:30 in the afternoon and I haven't had my lunch yet, so we'll get that out of the way and then we'll get into the detailed stuff. So here's the list. Fangio for his 5 world titles, a record he held for like 40 years. Jim Clark because, well, it's Jim Clark. Graham Hill for his Triple Crown, Stewart for his devotion to safety, Andretti for his roundedness as a driver, Senna because it's Senna, Schumacher for his 7 titles, Hamilton has to go in for the same reason, you've got Prost, Nuvolari for his pre-war exploits, and Sebastian Loeb, even if he did ruin rally for everybody. So 11 drivers on the list. If we can bump that up to 15, so pick 4 more to go in, then that's a good number. 20, okay, that's a round number. 10 is also a round number, but 15 seems like a good number. It's exclusive enough for the amount of racing drivers that there's been through motorsport history and the great drivers through motorsport history. So yeah, this is just a sample. These are just my picks. This is just my opinion. If you've got any other ones that you want to mention, leave them in the comments once I've done everything and get a discussion going. But we'll get into it now with AJ Foyt. When I did a video in early 2022 saying that Sebastian Loeb is probably the second greatest driver in history behind Jim Clark, I had a few angry comments saying the fact that I left out Foyt is a travesty and other words to that effect. The thing is, AJ Foyt really is only considered racing royalty in the United States, much like Peter Brock is in Australia. The reason we don't, for want of a better phrase, care about those kinds of drivers is because we've got the likes of Schumacher. Most people in Europe won't know who AJ Foyt is. Statistics time. AJ has won the Indy 500, Daytona 500, the Daytona 24 and the Le Mans 24. That's quite a CV already. On top of that, he's won the Indy 500 4 times, and he's also won the USAC title, now the NTT IndyCar Series, 7 times. He has 3 Formula 1 World Championship entries, but those are when the Indy 500 was part of the F1 World Championship. There is actually a list of AJ's other achievements listed online, but I'll pick the standout ones. 35 consecutive Indy 500s, the only person to win the 500 in front and rear engine cars. He won the Le Mans 24 and Indy 500 in the same year, the only person to do so. He's the first IndyCar driver to win Indy 4 times, and he has 12 major championships across a multitude of categories. They said he'd never live to be 22. He's 88 now. He also said that Jim Clark was the best guy he ever raced against, which might seem odd considering he typically avoided circuit racing and mostly stuck to ovals. At Riverside, he suffered a crash in a NASCAR Cup race where he smashed his back in. He also broke his heel, punctured a lung, and did some damage to his heart. He was racing in the Indy 500 2 months later. Jackie Stewart and Jim Clark respected him and were willing to give him the time of day. It's probably right that others in Europe do the same. Jackie Ickx is a seriously underrated driver. Although he'd never win the Formula 1 World Championship, reasons for which I've detailed in a past video, and we'll get to that as a recap in a minute, the guy has done some incredible things in other cars, particularly sports cars. Ickx had also started his career on motorcycles, like Damon Hill, but obviously with a lot more success. He had success on 2 wheels, winning 50cc races and titles in his early years, before moving on to sports cars. In 1966, he won the Spa 24, and when he was in Formula 1, he was seen as quite a maverick, not willing to go along with what Stewart, Brabham and the others were doing in terms of the whole Formula 1 driver safety. But in 1969, at the Le Mans 24 Hours, he kind of went against that, and in doing so, ended up changing the way Le Mans was run forever. The original Le Mans start had the drivers on one side of the track and the cars on the other. The flag would drop and the drivers sprinted to their cars, got in, started them, and drove off. In order to save time, the drivers would start doing more and more extreme things to get a little bit of a jump. Stirling Moss would leave his car in gear and would bump start it, and then into the 1960s, it was getting obvious that drivers were not putting seatbelts on when getting in, trying to do them on the Mulsanne later on. In the 1969 race, Jackie, driving the iconic Ford GT40, walked to his car, and there is a shot of him doing it that I'd love to use but can't. It's easily found on Google. He was the last one to his car, the last one in the car, and the last one to leave the grid, because he'd spent the extra time making sure he was in his car properly and securely fastened. By the end of that first lap, a driver was dead. Ickx and Jackie Oliver won the race. While not overly successful in Formula 1, although at the same time 8 wins in this era is nothing to be sniffed at, Ickx was still way more successful in sports cars, winning Le Mans a total of 6 times, only bettered by Tom Christensen. Ickx and Derek Bell became the guys at Porsche as the sport entered Group C. The two of them in their Rothmans cars winning Le Mans 3 times together, and Derek Bell himself is also a driver you should take a look at. In 1977, Ickx had been in a car, and then swapped into another car during the race, which was in 42nd place at the time. Ickx and Henri Pescarolo clawed back the positions and lost laps, and won, even with the car running on only 5 cylinders. Ickx's success didn't really come about in Formula 1 because of a theory I proposed in a video I did on the nearly men of the sport. That being, he was too young to be in with the likes of Stewart and Rindt, Clark and Hill and so on, and too old to be in with the newer kids that were coming through, Fittipaldi, Lauda, those guys. Giancarlo Fisichella was the same, too young to be in with Coulthard, Villeneuve, Schumacher and Hakkinen, but too old for the new guys, which at the time were Button, Alonso, Raikkonen, Massa and Heidfeld. Elsewhere, Ickx won the 1977 Bathurst 1000, being part of the first fully international driver pairing to win the race, partnered with the Canadian Alan Moffat, and he was also third in the 1966 BTCC season. He's also won the Dakar, doing that in 1983, and won Can-Am in 1979. Yes, Tom Christensen won more Le Mans victories. Tom Christensen could be one of the honourable mentions coming up later, but Ickx, just being a way more rounded driver, That puts him on this list of immortals, and also quite underrated. John Surtees is the only man to have won the World Championship on 2 and 4 wheels, winning the Formula 1 World Championship in 1964 for Ferrari, and also winning the Motorcycle World Championship, doing that in 1956, 58, 59 and 60, and I think that's now called MotoGP, or evolved to become MotoGP, or something along those lines. I mean, I'm not a bike guy. In 1958, 59 and 60, he won the 350cc and 500cc World Championships. But it's not just circuit racing where he was successful, because he was very good at road racing as well. He won the Isle of Man TT a combined 6 times across the 2 categories involved, the 350cc and 500cc, and I think he only came second twice. So, guy was absolutely insane on bikes. I've talked about the Isle of Man before. It's absolutely mental, but millions of people clearly love it. Surtees to race at places like the TT, the Ulster Grand Prix, and other events like it in conjunction with Formula 1 must have put him on borrowed time if the statistics at the time are anything to go by. But not only was he surviving an utterly dangerous era of racing, he was winning. As mentioned, he won the 1964 Formula 1 Championship. In sports cars, he'd be third at the 1,000 kilometres of Nürburgring in 1963, third at Le Mans in 1964, and won the Can-Am Series in 1966. But it was really motorbikes where he was at his most successful, and like Ickx, Surtees is one of those drivers that goes under the radar a little bit. Because to be a world champion on 2 and 4 wheels, it's not been done since. Maybe if Valentino Rossi had got into Formula 1 earlier he might have done, but who knows? It's one of motorsport's big what-ifs. And it's actually quite a horrible irony mentioning Surtees and what he did in the 50s and 60s, because he survived motorbikes and a 12-year career in Formula 1 and lived to be the age of 83, in a racing era that was motorsport at its most dangerous. And it was also an era where so many of his colleagues weren't so fortunate. McLaren, Rindt, Bandini and so on, only for his son to be killed at Brands Hatch in 2009, when motorsport was at its safest. Even though I'm not a bike guy, you can't have a list of the immortals without having John Surtees on the list. It's a unique achievement and deserves a lot more recognition. And my final pick to bring the number up to 15, I've got Michèle Mouton. As mentioned in my previous video on the minis at Monte Carlo, Patricia Moss opened the door that Michèle Mouton later kicked down. Starting out as a co-driver in rallying, she graduated to driving in 1973, and then drove her first WRC round at the Tour de Corse in 1974. She was only 12th in that rally, but her performances had been good enough that a few of her fellow competitors assumed that she was only doing well because her engine was a ringer, and not something that everybody else was using. This accusation was later thrown out when the engine was checked and found to be totally legal. In 1980, driving for Fiat, she was running second overall until her engine died. She would, up until 1981, only race in the Monte, the Tour de Corse, and did a couple of runs at the San Remo. But between 1978 and 1980, she'd be 7th at the Monte 3 times in a row, and 5th at the Tour de Corse 3 times in a row. In 1981, she was signed up by Audi to drive the Quattro, and at the San Remo of that year, she won it. Won it! Becoming the first woman to win a WRC event, and probably the first woman ever to win any FIA-sanctioned series, event. And then she'd be 2nd overall on 97 points, so yeah, she was pretty good at what she did. Getting signed by Audi was initially seen as being a marketing ploy. Have a woman in the car that doesn't do much other than look pretty, and could also be seen as a novelty for the WRC. Today, it would seen as being woke, tokenism, she shagged her way in, all of that stuff. But when she started beating the men and taking home their trophies, it was clear that she was the real deal. When she was racing in the German Rally Championship, they nicknamed her Der Schwarze Vulkan, or the Black Volcano, this being due to her personality and her jet black hair, but she even admitted that she wasn't there to beat the men, she just wanted to race them at their level. On top of this, she went to the Pikes Peak hill climb in 1985, and won, in record time as well. The win came as such a shock to everybody, she apparently offered to race the men back down if they wanted another crack at beating her. As the Group B era really entered its peak, Mouton was at Peugeot and was only a part-time driver, doing her home rallies at Monte Carlo and Corsica. But she wouldn't finish the 2 rounds she did in 1986 because of a retirement at both rounds. In Monte, her oil pump went, and at Corsica she was running 3rd and keeping up with Toivonen until her gearbox went. And then Toivonen crashed and was killed, with Mouton retiring from rally at the end of that year, but only after she won the German Rally Championship. Along with Patricia Moss, Mouton is the yardstick for female drivers everywhere, with female drivers currently in rallying calling her a role model and part of the reason they're involved, along with other drivers that are now coming up through the junior formula. Sterling Moss said she was one of the best, and Mouton went on to become part of the FIA's Women in Motorsport Commission. Being part of all of this is why I'm putting her into the Immortals list. Niki Lauda called her Superwoman. And if Niki Lauda is saying that, it must be true. There's probably a few of you now going, well, where's this guy? Where's that guy? You just mentioned Lauda. Why is he not on the list? But it's just a sample. There are other drivers that I think are slightly above that, or slightly more deserving. Is that really the term to use? But, you know, there are others. Niki Lauda, definitely one of them. Dale Earnhardt, Bobby Unser, Sebastian Ogier, Tom Christensen, they're definitely on the honourable mentions as well. Definite contenders for this list. They could easily bump it up to 20, but I thought 15 would be a good number. 20 is probably the maximum we can have, but, you know, I've not forgotten anybody, so you don't need to worry about that. I've not deliberately omitted anybody because I hate a particular driver and so on. You know, just ideas. But if you have any ideas of your own, do leave them in the comments and get a discussion going. So then, my picks for a list of 15 of motorsport's immortals. If this has been food for thought for you, do leave a like on this video and subscribe and get the bell on so you never miss out on anything else I do around here. Massive thanks to the rad lads at Patreon that continue to support this channel at a more personal level, and if you want to help out with the picture purchasing piggy bank and other bits and pieces, then a link to Patreon will be in the description, along with links to Discord, my socials, and my affiliate links if you want to get anything last minute before Christmas. Or there's super thanks if you just want to buy me a drink over the festive period, or there's memberships available to you as well if you want to support at a more overt level. So until next time, I've been Aidan Millward. Have a cracking Christmas wherever you are. If you don't celebrate Christmas, then have a great Monday, and I'll see you all again soon for another video. Goodbye.